A fall morning in the English countryside. In the shadow of Exeter Cathedral, shops do a brisk business. Publicans replenish their stock. And some 15 kilometers out of town, murder comes calling. 3:30 p.m. A man talks his way into the fashionable residence of Juliet Row. A struggle ensues. A chain is ripped from Juliet's neck. She runs down a hallway toward the front door and a panic button. As she flees, Juliet Row is shot 4 times in the back.
She managed to reach the panic button, but as she pressed the panic button, he put the weapon against her left temple and shot her point blank through the head.
Inside the house, 333 fingerprints are lifted from the crime scene and examined. All but 10 are identified and cleared. Meanwhile, the whispers begin to gather that police have a fix on their killer, Juliet Row's husband, Gerald.
And I had friends of mine who'd be in a pub and that somebody else would be talking, oh, you see that Gerald Row, he murdered his wife. And they'd say, look, hang on, you don't even know the bloke. It just got completely out of hand. It really did.
Police do take a hard look at Gerald Row and clear him as a suspect. In time, other leads wither and the case goes cold. Until one night in a pub, almost 8 years later. For Gerald Row, life has moved on. One night he stops in at the Nutwell Lodge.
And some guy came up and tapped me on the shoulder and he said, you're Gerald Row, aren't you? So I said, yeah. So he said, you don't remember me, do you? I said, sorry, I can't say as I do.
The stranger introduces himself as Keith Rose. Gerald Row buys him a pint, and then the conversation takes a turn.
Then the next thing he went into, he said, oh, you know, I was pulled in on your wife's murder. So I said, well, a lot of people were, you know, and I said, it's a long time ago now.
The talk drifts to business, and then back to murder.
Then he went back to the murder again. And I was getting a bit embarrassed from my girlfriend and so forth at the time, so I looked at her and I said, come on, we'll make a move. And we left and went home, said cheerio to him.
Row forgets Keith Rose and that night in the pub, until some 6 weeks later.
I come home, pick up the paper. Keith Rose been caught for kidnap. And I thought, that's funny.
Keith Rose is front page news. Arrested for the kidnap and ransom of Victor Cracknell, the son of a prominent businessman.
When we got the call from Gerald Row and there'd actually been an approach to him by Rose, and bearing in mind the seriousness of the offence that Rose was in custody for, we started to look at it quite seriously then.
8 years after the fact, England's cold case detectives decide to reopen the Juliet Row killing. Cold case detective Phil Sincock's first order of business: run Rose's fingerprints against prints from the Row crime scene.
Well, I can remember when I'd suggested that that was the first inquiry we should do, that more or less the whole office fell about laughing, saying you'd be pretty lucky if that print came up.
The laughter dies quickly, as 3 of the unknowns, a left thumbprint from the bedroom, and 2 palm prints, are matched to Rose. Sincock then decides to interview his suspect. He does not, however, tell Rose about the print match.
Rose talked freely to us, and during the course of that interview, he stated on at least 20 or 30 occasions that he did not know where the victim lived and had certainly never been to the house.
With his prints found at the scene, it appears that Keith Rose is either badly mistaken or lying. 5 days later, Rose learns about the fingerprint match from a newspaper article and asks to see Sincock again. This time, Rose provides police with a new story and a reason why his prints might be in Juliet Row's house.
What he said was that he'd been thinking about his conversation with us, and he'd remembered that at about that time, in his words, a friend of his had asked him to do him a favour by fitting a mobile phone at a house in the Budleigh Salterton area. He didn't know whose house it was, he didn't know who lived there, and he said he could only explain to us where it was. Well, of course, his explanation of the route to get to the house was to the murder scene.
The cover story is desperate, but clever enough to cast doubt on the prints. Sincock must dig for more. He looks to bullets fired from the murder weapon.
Back in 1981, they noticed that some of the bullets at the murder scene were in fact very rare. They were Remington Wasp Yellow Jacket high-velocity .22 rounds, and only a few thousand of those rounds were in circulation at about the time of the murder.
In 1981, police reviewed local records but could not find anyone who had purchased the Yellow Jacket rounds. Sincock, however, mines a bit deeper and strikes gold.
We revisited a gun shop in Crediton in Devon that we knew Rose used, and went back a little bit further than the original investigators, in fact to the register before the last one that they'd seen. And there, towards the end of the entries in that register, was the fact that Rose had purchased 200 rounds of that rare ammunition some months before the actual murder.
Sincock can now place Keith Rose at the murder scene with the same rare type of bullets used to kill Juliet Row. Finding the murder weapon, however, remains a problem. In 1981, Keith Rose owned 4 guns. 3 were test-fired by police and eliminated as possible murder weapons. The 4th, a Colt .22, was rusted out and in pieces. Police considered it unfireable and never tested it. 8 years later, Sincock hunts the weapon down at a local gun shop.
It was recovered in this condition, in pieces, and very, very rusty. There were certainly some indications that it had been soaked in some corrosive material some years previously, and certainly it had been allowed to rust out and deteriorate.
Sincock believes this is the gun used to kill Juliet Row, purposely sabotaged to prevent it from being tested. Keith Rose, however, made one mistake. He forgot about the magazine inside the gun.
The magazine to this weapon is held in the hilt and slides out like that, and obviously was slightly more protected, being actually inside the metalwork of the main body of the gun itself.
How did a magazine help Sincock catch a killer? On the shell casings recovered from the crime scene, ballistic experts notice a strange mark, almost like a pinprick. Sincock reaches out to the United States, to the FBI, and the Colt Company itself to help explain the mark. They identify a flaw in the magazine and ejection mechanism of Rose's .22, one that would prove to be fatal to Keith Rose's defense.
This particular Colt Woodsman has a fault in that the retaining clip here holds the magazine too far into the breech of the weapon.
According to the experts, this flaw created the unique marks on the murder shell casings.
The bullets are .22 caliber, as you can see.
In England, the challenge is to prove the American theory by replicating the mark on new shell casings. The marks on the test firings were identical to those on the casings found at the murder. Phil Sincock comes as close as he can to firing a gun that could not be fired, and proving that this rusted-out piece killed Juliet Row. On February 1st, 1990, Keith Rose is charged with murder. At trial, he is found guilty of murder and sent to Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight.
I think it's just the plain gall of the guy. It must have given him some sort of thrill to just be speaking to me, knowing he's killed my wife. It must have given him some sort of buzz. That's all I can think of.
It's something of his character, really, Keith Rose, that he would have enjoyed going up to Gerald Rowe, almost in a boastful fashion, and asking him about his wife's murder, thinking to himself how clever he was that he was actually the murderer standing there talking to the victim's husband. That's the nature of the man.
The nature of the man. The nature, according to Phil Sincock, of evil.
Getting to know Rose over the period of about 16 months that the investigation took, I fully realised what an evil person he was and how he should be taken away out of society. And I think his incarceration, together with the look on Gerald Rowe's face when his ordeal was finally over, are the things that I remember from that investigation.